Hey everyone, my name is Utsab. I'm the founder of Up Early. Now, I have this belief that we can all level up our results in life by changing our basic habits. And today, we're going to learn about the habits of being an Olympian learner from Sharif, as he puts it. We're here with Sharif Abu Shadi. He's one of the original teachers at Dev Bootcamp. He was there from the very first year. For those of you who are not familiar with Dev Bootcamp, it started out as an experiment back in 2012 where they took on a bunch of students with varied backgrounds and trained them how to become web developers in 9 weeks. They sent them out into the world and they all got hired as web developers. So we're going to learn about some of Sharif's habits around learning. But before we do that, a quick word about the Up Early app. So this is something that I created to solve a problem in my own life, how to wake up early, which I could not do because I would keep hitting the snooze button or turn off my alarm. So I personally built this app, and what it does is it forces me to get up, go outside, get some fresh air, move around a little bit to prove that I'm awake. And if I don't do it or try to turn off my alarm, it will automatically email my accountability buddies and let them know exactly what Utsab did that day. And so you can download it on the App Store. It's a free app, UPEARLY, all one word. And as a bonus, if you download it and use it once, I will personally be your accountability coach for 30 days for free, and I'll help you design a program for any habit of your choice. Welcome, Sharif.
Hey, what's up? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So the first thing I want to ask you, Sharif, is what is this term Olympian learner? I hear you say that a lot.
Yeah, so I'm not an Olympic athlete myself, so maybe I have no idea what it means. But what I think it means, or what I mean by it, is there's a kind of a frame of mind that you get in when you're doing something for real. It's not something that you just kind of dabble in or whatever. You sort of dedicate your full self to it, and I think that to help communicate to students what I mean by fully dedicating themselves to learning how to program, I use the phrase Olympian learner to invoke the vision of an Olympic athlete starting at a very young age and practicing for umpteen hours a day for many years to be even given the chance to compete in the Olympic Games, let alone place or win a medal or something like that. So it's just a lot of hard work, and I think it's something that people can relate to. I could just as easily say, be a PhD learner or be a Nobel laureate learner. Really, anything that's recognized as a significant achievement just takes a lot of hard work. And I think when I say that, I'm kind of trying to shake people out of the complacency of their K-12 and undergrad educational experiences, where for the vast majority of us, the experience is very passive. We sit back, the teacher tells us, what chapters to read, what practice problems to work on, sometimes what's going to be on the test. We check a few boxes and move on to the next class, before we fall asleep. And really the way to learn effectively is not passively like that. It's actually a very active process.
Hmm. And around being an active learner, have you found that there are, say, patterns or a set of habits or components to that we could learn from?
Yeah, I think so. I wish I'd spent more time writing this down, but the one sort of way to have this conversation is to put it into some kind of a framework for discussion, right? So let's say there's three components to learning. I kind of just make this stuff up as I go along, so bear with me. In order to learn something, we have to be motivated to learn. We have to actually have the will to learn, and there's a whole bunch more I could say about that, but let's just say motivation is one component. Another component is that we have to actually spend the time doing it. We're not at the point yet where we can kind of plug in with the matrix and learn Kung Fu in a few seconds. It actually takes time, and we're trading that time for the knowledge that we get back and the know-how. And so motivation, time, and then some kind of engagement with the material. you know, whether it's writing or reading or talking about it or practicing with it, we have to somehow manipulate the material in reality in order to learn about it. And so motivation, time, and engagement would be three things that I would say are critical to learning. And then I could go on and talk about what I mean and some examples of each of those if you like.
That'd be great, actually. Could we hear an example of how you motivate yourself and how you make the time for this, and then maybe an example for how you go about transforming that knowledge into whatever has worked for you?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay, so let's take a couple of very concrete examples for each one. So I'll talk about what people usually do and what I've encouraged some of our students to do that's been effective for them. Motivation. Talk about reading a book. A lot of times I'll hear students say, I'm not good at reading, I don't enjoy reading, I'm such a slow reader, I don't learn from reading, all of which is reasonable because in their experience that's how it works. They open a book starting at page 1 and they kind of fight their way through the book, sometimes getting hopelessly confused along the way, often putting the book down halfway or even less, and not finishing it and feeling frustrated by it. It's not sort of a pleasant, active experience. So if I were to recommend someone to read a book, we can go through each of those headings: motivation, time, and engagement, and talk about how I might read a book. When I start reading a book, I want to be sure that I'm not wasting my time. So I will go wide and look for all the books published since 2010 or in the last 5 years or whatever on a particular subject. Let's say I'm studying JavaScript. It's not a long list, 30, 40 books, whatever the number is. It's not impossibly long. And I'll take those books and maybe pick, somehow try and prioritize them for myself by, taking a look at the Amazon reviews for the book. Maybe cost is a factor, so which ones are available online for free, for example, or the authors, if there's a notable author. So I can kind of pare that list down to, say, 2 or 3 books, and then I'll just randomly pick one of them. When I pick that first book, the very first thing I do is try and get myself really jazzed about the book. So I'll look up the authors online. I'll read the Amazon reviews, especially the 5-star reviews, because the goal isn't to assess the book. I've already done that. It's part of my list, my short list. The goal is now to get myself excited. So I'll look at the 5-star reviews, maybe the 4-star reviews, try and work myself into this sort of a frenzy of curiosity about the book and imagining myself being done with the book and how I'll feel, being excited to learn more from these thought leaders who wrote the book, for example. And so I'll kind of start there. And once I have a sense of who's talking to me through the book and why people believe the book is worthwhile, I'll try and sort of move through the book in layers. So I'm motivated now. I want to spend my time. The first layer through the book, I'll skim the table of contents. An easy way to describe it is once per level of indentation. So let me make that more specific. If the book has 3 main sections, and that means I'll skim it at least once to go through, well, what are those main sections? Introduction to JavaScript, I don't know, functional programming with JavaScript, maybe program design, whatever the 3 sections are. And then inside of those sections, maybe there's a couple of chapters for each section. I'll skim the entire table of contents a second time because it's a second level of indentation. And then maybe each of those chapters has a little blurb about it in the table of contents. So that'll be a third skim. So the first skim, I'll read the sections. The second skim, I'll read the sections and the chapter headings. The third skim, I'll read the sections, the chapter headings, and the small summary of the chapter. So really in a matter of minutes. So far on this book, I've spent less than 10 minutes. I learned about the authors. I've learned what people like about the book and what makes it exciting for them. I have the entire structure of the book kind of in my mind at a level of awareness now, right? So it's not like I've memorized the book or anything. I'm not some fancy speed reader, or I don't have a photographic memory. None of that, fancy stuff that people talk about and is debatable to begin with. I'm just a regular human being, and what I'm trying to do is to keep myself excited and use my time as wisely as possible. So I'll skim through the table of contents several times like that, once per level of indentation, and then I'll actually pick the most interesting chapter first, which seems to be a bit counterintuitive. Most of us start with page 1 and read through to the end. I'll actually try and keep myself excited about the book, and to minimize the amount of wasted time that I spend on the book. I may end up hating it, for example, and putting it down. I may not like the way the author explains it. I may realize I know most of it, whatever it is. I'll actually pick the most interesting chapter first, the most compelling chapter first, and I'll go to that chapter. What if it's chapter 10, you say, and there's a bunch of prerequisites? That's okay. I'm all right with that feeling of confusion, because I believe that my biggest enemy here, my biggest threat, is not reading the book at all. My biggest threat is not being confused or feeling uncomfortable. The biggest threat is actually never reading the book. And so what I'm trying to do is construct a way to sort of keep me jazzed and excited, and to make maximum use of the time that I spend. Anyway, right to that first most interesting chapter. I'm not going to read the chapter yet. I'll actually skim the chapter. And by that I mean reading each of the subheadings in the chapter, and then reading each of the, say, first sentences in each paragraph in the chapter, and then maybe going through any code snippets and looking at those, again, sweeping multiple times over the same piece of work. So I could finish a 10 or 20 page chapter in, again, a matter of minutes, even though I've passed several times through it. And what will happen for me is, after a couple of chapters like this, and sort of have the organization of the book in my mind, I will decide, wow, this book is really worth my time. I may go back and start at chapter 1 and finish the book, but I'm so excited about finishing this book now. I have all this energy. I can kind of steamroll through those hurdles that typically stop us, where we get drowsy or get distracted or whatever. The book really becomes kind of the center of my attention. I've almost kind of hypnotized myself to be really excited about the content that I'm about to read. And then in terms of the engagement, how I engage the material, it comes down to things like the skimming, multiple passes through the book, identifying that first chapter. It's all part of the same story. But if I start to feel a bit overwhelmed, right away I'll pick up a piece of paper and pencil and start to draw out kind of a mental model of the contents of the chapter, or even just transcribe some of the code, by hand, getting my muscles involved and getting my body involved in moving and staying the course with the material. So I don't know if that's a reasonable example of that, but basically, motivation is really one of the hardest things, especially if it's some very distant reward, like getting a job or something like that. So I try and make the motivation very concrete and very immediate. I'm excited about the authors. I'm excited about the idea or the content. In terms of time and spending that time, if you can imagine.
Could I actually just ask a question about the motivation example?
Yeah, sure.
So what I'm noticing there is you are safeguarding yourself against that problem of being really excited at the start and then lose focus and wondering what's the point of this, because you've kind of fast forwarded to that most exciting part that you know what the point is, and so you can remind yourself, oh well, that's why I'm doing this, to get to that point. Is that why you do that? Is that the benefit?
That's exactly right. So there's something about visualizing the outcome, sort of seeing yourself in the position where you've succeeded, and it's very energizing. It's very thrilling, and it's really it makes it much easier for me to stay kind of excited and motivated about the body of work that I'm studying. Let's say there's a risk where some people will talk a lot about what they plan to do and get a lot of kind of positive feedback from friends and family. Oh, that sounds amazing. And then doing the actual work is kind of like underwhelming. So part of that kind of might be keeping it a little bit to yourself, like holding that enthusiasm and containing that enthusiasm and until you feel like you're ready to burst. But instead of spending that energy on winning people's approval, you spend the energy on actually doing the work. So that's that's part of something that's on my mind, is kind of how I build up the energy and how I spend it, and by that I mean my excitement and my enthusiasm and so on.
Sure. So what about the time? Do you have an example for how you make the time for this?
Yeah, so the beauty of the example that I just gave you is that it actually works well for talking about time. There's this belief that I've seen in so many students that have come through Dev Bootcamp that reading is hard, it takes a lot of time. How could I possibly read? What I recommend is 5 to 10 books a week, because it takes me hours and hours and hours to finish a book. Well, if you are able to consume the table of contents and a couple of chapters, 2, 3, 4 chapters inside of an hour, you could reasonably finish a book a day in 2 or 3 hours of reading. I'm not sure if all the math works out, but it certainly means that you can dedicate, let's say, an hour in the morning, an hour at lunch, and an hour in the evening to reading a book, and really get 60, 70, maybe 80% of the book's value out of it in that amount of time. And then, of course, there's the network effects of cumulative effects of reading multiple books. So again, many people push back and say, well, I already read a book about subject X. Why should I read another one? Well, I can tell you, as someone who's read, say, 18 or so of the 30 odd published works about JavaScript since 2010, that once you read many of these books, you realize that there's a very distinct patterns in the books, and you can actually move faster through much of the content after the second, third, or fourth book, because a lot of it's repetitive. And then you end up sort of running into these absolute golden nuggets that no other book mentions. I can give you an example of a book. I don't know if it would be interesting for your audience because it's a bit technical, and from a JavaScript perspective, you could let me know.
No, absolutely. Curious to hear it.
So there's a book called Secrets of the JavaScript Ninja, written by John Resig, the author of jQuery, for example. It's the only book that on page 40 or 50 or something like this, the only reason I know these details is because I've mentioned this to other people, you understand. It's not because I memorized the book. That on page 40 or 50 or so talks about 4 ways to invoke JavaScript functions, very discreetly. Here's one way, here's a second way, here's a third way, here's a fourth way. I haven't found that anywhere else. There's literally no other book published since 2010, and call me a liar because I haven't read all of them, that mentions that what I believe to be a critical component of understanding JavaScript program design and runtime behavior, the mysteries of the value of this, and all the stuff that people kind of over dramatize a little bit. That book explains it, 5 pages and you're done. Makes perfect sense, in and out. You wouldn't know that if your belief was, I need to find the best book or the only book, because that book actually doesn't cover a lot of other things that other books do. So I think to try and finally answer your question about how I allocate my time, I actually view time differently, and the allocation of that time differently because of the pace that I keep. How I motivate myself and how I engage the material. It's really easy to find or make the time to sit down for an hour or two, smash through a couple of 100 pages of a book I haven't read, pull out the 3 or 4 new pieces of information, and make note of them, talk about them, share them, whatever.
So I want to ask you about this process you go through of spending 2 to 3 hours and getting 70 to 80% of the value out of that book. Are you able to do this because you're following that process of skimming through the chapters and reading the subheadline and then only the first paragraph or the first sentence of each paragraph? Is that how you're able to get through 80% of the value of a book in a span of 3 hours?
Yeah, it's less about the process, and it's more about the underlying sort of approach that I'm taking. So if you think about kind of like wax on, wax off, type stuff, it's not about waxing the car or painting the fence. It's about what leads to that behavior. And so taking that behavior sort of is benefits, not because you're moving your hand up and down, but because that movement represents one way to work with the material that is based on this underlying approach that I'm taking. And that approach, I kind of hinted at it earlier, is really sort of like managing my energy. And by that I mean my motivation and enthusiasm as I'm learning. So it's almost like I'm kind of playing with a game with myself. The opponent, let's say, if you want to have it sort of an opponent, is my future self, who will eventually know the thing that I'm trying to learn. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, what advice would I give myself from the future if I already knew this? That's actually a thought that occurs to me as I'm learning constantly. And so I think back to myself and I say, don't waste your time with this. This seems irrelevant. This paragraph's poorly written. This code snippet is out of context. Just skip it. And so by giving myself permission to optimize the process while I'm moving through it, the end result is I'm skimming the table of contents several times to build the structure of the book. I'm picking the first chapter is the most interesting chapter, not sequentially chapter number 1. But because my future self is saying, when I read this book, my favorite chapter was this one. Go read that one first. I think it'll get you excited about it. So if I don't know if that helps or makes things a little bit worse, but what I'm trying to say is anybody can come up with their own process as long as the underlying sense is keep yourself motivated and engaged and moving through the book.
So is the ability to get the most out of a book in an efficient way, it's what you're saying, it's more a function of your motivation and how effectively you can keep yourself motivated throughout that.
Yeah, motivation, how you're allocating your time, and how you're actually engaging the material. So just like, for example, the process would break down if all I'm doing is just passively like moving my eyeballs over the page the whole time, sort of, kind of cursing myself and, in my inner voice saying, well, I'm not good at reading. I'm not good at reading. I'm not getting anything out of this. You can go through all the same movements of painting the fence or whatever, but you're not going to learn anything from it. So the internal dialogue is critical. That sort of playful, curious excitement makes a huge difference, obviously.
Sure. Okay, so let's talk about the last piece of that. You mentioned the idea of transforming the knowledge as you're reading it. Yeah, so you gave an example of how you might draw out visual diagrams and such. Yeah. Any other habits you have around that might be that we could learn from?
Yeah, so in terms of the book as a specific example, there's a ton of things that you can do by trying to rephrase something, explain it to somebody, find examples in the wild of a particular concept that's illustrated in the book, reproduce something to help you kind of really own the sense of what it's about. Maybe writing your own code to get a sense of how it works or something like that. There's a number of different things there, but really, the underlying idea there is you kind of, what you're trying to do is keep yourself in play with the material. Physically engaging it is nice so that your muscles are literally moving while you're doing it. Social engagement is nice so that you're explaining it to someone else or something like that. Leaving a breadcrumb trail of your progress is nice so you can wake up in the morning and feel, pride in your achievement. So there's all sorts of, opportunities to do that work. But really it's just a matter of like transforming and changing, engaging the material, whether you're drawing pictures or you can even record a song about it. Some of our students have done that where they'll you can find them on YouTube, I think. They recorded a rap video about some new, topics they were learning. Whatever it is that's going to be fun and playful and keep you enjoying yourself, as long as you continue to move and work with the material, that helps people learn.
Great. So there you have it. These are the 3 habits from Sharif. We've got, on the one hand, figuring out how to motivate yourself. Number 2 was allotting the time to actually learn the material. And finally, number 3 was finding different ways to engage with it. So thank you so much, Sharif, for doing this interview, and thanks everyone for listening.